So how did we get here? I mean, how did life, in all its incredible, messy complexity, spring up from a bunch of simple, non-living chemicals? It's a huge question, right? Well, let's get into it, because a really cool new study suggests the answer might be way simpler and a lot more explosive than we ever thought.
You know, this is genuinely one of the biggest questions out there. How do you go from a primordial soup of basic stuff to the incredibly complex machinery of DNA and proteins and cells? That gap, it's a massive puzzle, and scientists have been wrestling with it for ages.
All right, so to really dig into how life got started, we've got to talk about something specific, a little hurdle scientists call the polymer puzzle. Okay, so polymers, they're pretty much everything when it comes to life. Just think of them like long chains, kind of like Legos, made by linking smaller pieces, the monomers, together. Our proteins, they're just polymers of amino acids. Our DNA, that's a polymer of nucleotides. They are, quite literally, the scaffolding of all life as we know it.
Now, inside one of your cells right now, making these polymers is, well, it's pretty easy. You've got these little biological machines, enzymes, that are amazing at building these chains. But think about ancient Earth. It was a barren rock. No enzymes, no cellular machinery. So the big question is, how on earth did those first essential chains get built without any of that fancy biological toolkit?
And this is where things get really tricky. For a long time, everyone was focused on amino acids, the building blocks of proteins. But here's the problem. When you try to get them to link up under early Earth conditions, they just don't cooperate. Instead of making these long, useful chains, they curl up on themselves and form these tiny, dead-end circles. It's been a massive roadblock. But what if we've been looking at the wrong Lego bricks this whole time? What if life actually got its start with something completely different? Okay, let me introduce you to the potential heroes of our story, alpha-hydroxy acids. We'll just call them AHAs. They look a lot like amino acids, but there's this one tiny, subtle difference in their chemical structure. And that little difference, it turns out, changes everything. So why all the excitement about these guys? Well, for a few really good reasons. First off, we know they were around back then. We can make them in lab experiments that copy early Earth conditions, and we've even found them on meteorites that have crashed here. But here's the kicker. They are just chemically eager to link together. They form these things called ester bonds, and the important part is, these bonds are way easier to make than the peptide bonds in our proteins. It just takes less energy. That makes them a much more likely candidate for a starting point. Okay, so now we get to the really cool part. Let's talk about the experiment that showed just how powerful this chemistry really is, because this is where a super simple recipe leads to, well, an explosion of complexity. And the setup for this experiment, it's so simple, it's brilliant. The scientists literally just took a few different HLAs, mixed them in some water, heated it up a little bit, and let the water evaporate. That's it. They were basically mimicking a puddle drying up on a hot day on ancient Earth. No magic ingredients, no complicated lab equipment. So they started off really simple. They just mixed two types of these AHAs together. And even with only two starting ingredients, what they got back was this surprisingly rich, incredibly diverse library of brand new, longer molecules. And when I say diverse, I mean really diverse. Their analysis showed that from just those two starting molecules, there was the potential to create over 3.4 million different unique chains. Let that sink in. Two ingredients, millions of possibilities. That was a huge sign that this chemistry was capable of generating variety on an absolutely massive scale. So, of course, that leads to the next big question, right? If you can get millions of combinations from just two types, what happens when you throw 5 different types into the mix? The result is just wow. What you're seeing here is a visual representation of all the different molecules they found. Each one of those little spikes is a different kind of molecule. It's not just a few new things. It's a dense, chaotic, beautiful forest of thousands upon thousands of different chemical species. Yeah, this wasn't some neat and tidy library of molecules. This was a completely uncontrolled, spontaneous explosion of chemical diversity. It was a chemical Big Bang. And if you want to put a number on it, get this. With just 5 starting molecules, there are 9.5 trillion possible polymer sequences just 20 units long. Trillion! And this one simple reaction probably created a huge chunk of that enormous chemical landscape all at once. So, what does all this mean? I mean, a huge uncontrolled explosion of molecules might just sound like a big mess, right? But for the origin of life, that mess might have been the absolute perfect starting point. It's like it created a massive playground for evolution to start playing in.
The researchers who did this study put it perfectly. They said that with this kind of chemistry, any little proto-organism just starting out would have automatically had access to this huge toolbox of long-chain molecules. And some of those molecules could have had really useful abilities, like maybe speeding up other chemical reactions. So you really have to shift your thinking. This isn't just messy chaos. It's an incredible pool of raw material. It's like nature suddenly had a giant warehouse filled with every possible tool you could imagine, and natural selection could just walk through and start picking out the ones that worked, the ones that happened to fold into a useful shape, or could grab another molecule, and it could just start building from there.
So let's just wrap up why this is such a huge deal. What this does is it gives us a really simple, totally plausible way to get from a few basic chemicals to the massive complexity life needs. It kind of changes the origin of life from being this 1 in a trillion lottery ticket win to, well, something that might just be a totally normal outcome of planetary chemistry. And that suggests that maybe, just maybe, life isn't some weird fluke here on Earth. Maybe it's a common thing all across the universe. And that leaves us with one last kind of mind-bending thought. Today, we are made of proteins and DNA. That's our system. But what if the very first life on Earth wasn't? What if it was built from these simpler polyesters, and they just acted as a kind of temporary scaffold until the more complex, efficient systems we have today could evolve and take over? Just think about that. What if life started out with a completely different chemical operating system? It's a question that really changes how we think about where we came from.